What's up guys, my name is Alex, welcome to this new video. Today we'll be comparing the iPhone XS against the iPhone 12 Pro. So let's get started right away. So I've had the iPhone XS since November 2018. I got it just a few weeks after launch and have had it since pretty much until I got my 12 Pro. And I've had a really good time with this phone. You can find a card up here for my previous video, which was iPhone XS 2 years later, where you'll find a lot more detailed information about using this device on a daily basis in 2020. And right here I've got my iPhone 12 Pro, which I literally got just a few days ago. So in this video I'll also share some of my first impressions with this iPhone 12 Pro. Now if you do want to see a full review, do subscribe to the channel. That will be coming up very soon. I've also got an iPad Air 4th generation review coming up. So yeah, if you don't want to miss either of those, subscribe to the channel. So the iPhone 12 Pro has an A14 Bionic chip inside, whereas the iPhone XS has an A12 Bionic chip. Both of these are 6-core CPUs with 2 high-performance cores and 4 high-efficiency cores. And while there might be a significant difference in score between these two, I have to say that in daily use, there's basically no difference in terms of performance. Obviously the iPhone 12 Pro is really fast and snappy, but the XS really doesn't feel any slower. Obviously it actually is slower, but you only notice the differences when comparing the two side by side, and even then the differences come down to milliseconds in most cases. So obviously enough, iPhone 12 Pro, top in class performance, it did just come out, but the iPhone XS really is not that far behind. It's still very competitive with a lot of the other smartphones that are on the market right now. One key difference is that the iPhone 12 Pro has 6GB of RAM as opposed to the 4GB found in the iPhone XS, but to be honest I have to say I don't really see a huge difference at all. It does reload apps ever so slightly less often than the iPhone XS would, but really neither phone struggles to keep apps in RAM. Obviously the 12 Pro is a little bit better, but I have to say I haven't noticed a huge difference. And even when the XS has to reload apps, it really doesn't take that long. It only takes about a second. So it's really no big deal, I would say. So right now performance really isn't that different between these two, but I'm sure that in a couple of years time, when the iPhone XS is 4 years old and the 12 Pro is 2 years old, that's when we'll probably start seeing a bigger difference between the two. But yeah, as I said, right now, nothing really that significant in terms of performance. The design of these two devices is equally similar as it is different, and it's similar in the sense that they're both based on the 2017 iPhone X, but it's just a different execution of that general concept. So obviously both have very slim bezels, the slim bezel design with the notch and no home button, the 19.5 by 9 display aspect ratio, and the general glass sandwich and stainless steel side structure of the phones. Now, as you've probably already noticed, the iPhone XS has curved sides, which were first introduced with the iPhone 6 and 6S, whereas the iPhone 12 Pro has flat sides, as you can see, which were first introduced with the iPhone 4 and perfected with the iPhone 5S. One final difference in design is that the glass on the iPhone XS is shiny and reflective, whereas the glass on the iPhone 12 Pro has this beautiful matte finish. I'm a huge fan of both the looks and the ergonomics of the iPhone 12 Pro, but I do also appreciate the aesthetic of the iPhone XS, as well as the seamless transition from glass to stainless steel to glass. This is actually really nice and impressive. It really feels like it's all one piece, but I do have to say that it is easier to get a solid grip with the flat sides on the iPhone 12 Pro than it is with the curved sides on the iPhone XS. Now, although the iPhone 12 Pro is actually slightly thinner than the iPhone XS, it does feel a bit thicker because of the flat sides. The difference is minimal. The iPhone 12 Pro is 7.4mm thick, whereas the iPhone XS is 7.7mm thick. But yeah, as I said, the 12 Pro does feel a little bit more chunky because of those flatter sides. The 12 Pro weighs 189 grams, whereas the XS weighs 177. And I have to say, now that I'm holding them side by side, I don't really notice a massive difference, which is strange because I used to think that my XS was really light, and when I first got my 12 Pro, I thought it was quite heavy compared to the XS, but now that I'm holding them side by side, they really feel about the same in terms of weight. Now, yes, the 12 Pro does feel slightly heavier, but it's a tiny difference. I have to say that the difference that I found between the iPad Air 4 and 1 is much more noticeable, even though on paper it's a much smaller difference. I've noticed that the iPhone 12 Pro doesn't really get that warm. At most it gets neutral, and it's cool to the touch pretty much all the time, regardless of what you're doing, regardless of how intensive what you're doing is. The XS, on the other hand, does get a little bit warm right around here, the Apple logo, and this usually happens during longer sessions of intense use, but it never really gets hot, it only ever gets warm. Now, I don't know if this is due to the poorer thermal conductivity of the matte glass here, or if it's just due to the lower heat output of the A14 in the iPhone 12 Pro, considering that it is a 5nm process-based system on a chip compared to the 7nm plus process used for the iPhone XS. Now, there are some notable display differences. So the iPhone XS has a 5.8-inch display with a resolution of 2436 by 1125 and a pixel density of 458, which is the same as the iPhones 10 and 11 Pro, whereas the iPhone 12 Pro has a 6.1-inch display with a resolution of 2532 by 1170 and a pixel density of 460 pixels per inch, so really a tiny difference. And the display size on the 12 Pro is the same as the iPhones 10R, 11 and the non-Pro iPhone 12. Now, both of these displays are OLED, which means you're going to have really deep blacks and really vibrant colors. However, the XS reaches a typical brightness of 625 nits, which is slightly higher than the 600 nits on the iPhone 12, by the way, the 12 non-Pro, whereas the iPhone 12 Pro reaches a typical brightness of 800 nits, and it can peak up to 1200 nits when viewing HDR content. The difference is noticeable, but I have to say it's not huge. The XS's display is still plenty bright outdoors, but obviously the 12 Pro is just that little bit brighter to make it easier to see. I've also noticed that colors are ever so slightly different on the 12 Pro. I get the impression that they're a little bit warmer, whereas the XS's colors are a little bit cooler, but the difference isn't massive, and you only really notice it with certain specific images or UI elements. One thing the iPhone XS has over the iPhone 12 Pro is 3D Touch. 3D Touch was introduced with the iPhone 6s and 6s Plus, and it's a technology built into the display that can detect different levels of pressure. So you can push harder on the display to perform haptic touch functions, but faster. So the iPhone 12 Pro does have haptic touch as well, so you can long press to get haptic touch options, whereas on the iPhone XS you do have that 3D touch pressure sensitive display, which means that you can push harder and get access to haptic touch features straight away. So if I push hard straight away, you can see that I get the pop-up immediately, whereas with the iPhone 12 Pro I do have to long press and wait a little bit. So the iPhone XS is actually better than the iPhone 12 Pro in this regard, but I have to say the difference is minor. I definitely do miss 3D Touch on the iPhone 12 Pro, but it's not been that big of a deal. I can live without 3D Touch. But I will reiterate that 3D Touch is nice to have, and I do prefer it over using haptic touch. Fun fact that I just remembered, actually, the iPhone XS was the last iPhone to ever ship with 3D Touch, because the iPhone's 11 Pro didn't have it either. There isn't a huge difference in terms of actual physical size between these two. As you can see, there is a very small difference in terms of height, and they have pretty much the exact same width, because as you can see, the XS can pretty much completely cover the iPhone 12 Pro. In terms of the width, we just have this little bit at the top sticking out. Although the difference in physical size really is not that significant, I do have to say that the 12 Pro does actually feel bigger in the hand, but it didn't take me too long to get used to it. It only took me about a couple of days, and I'm the kind of guy who prefers more compact phones. I can definitely say that I do prefer the XS's size. Next, we've got the cameras. So the iPhone XS has two 12 megapixel cameras, a wide lens and a telephoto lens, as well as a front-facing 7 megapixel camera. The rear cameras can film video at 4K 60 FPS, whereas the front camera is limited to 1080p 60 FPS. The iPhone 12 Pro, on the other hand, has four 12 megapixel cameras. We've got a wide, ultra-wide and telephoto on the back, and we've also got a selfie camera on the front, and all cameras can record video in 4K 60, but the back cameras can do 4K 60 10-bit HDR with Dolby Vision, whereas the front camera can still do HDR Dolby Vision 10-bit video, but it's limited to 4K 30 FPS. Now, you will most likely need an HDR display to actually view the HDR content produced by the 12 Pro properly, otherwise it's likely that the colors will appear really blown out on a standard dynamic range display. If you wanted to, you can disable this in settings right here, and video still does look excellent, even without that HDR setting turned on. In good lighting, especially outdoors with natural light, there isn't a massive difference between these cameras at all in terms of quality. The only thing I really noticed is that the 12 Pro has a slightly better dynamic range. Maybe slightly more true to life colors as well. Now in low light, that's where we do see a massive difference. So the iPhone 12 Pro has night mode, whereas the iPhone XS doesn't. And yeah, there's really not much to say. It's a night and day difference between these two cameras when it comes to low light. Some of the shots that the 12 Pro takes in low light are actually pretty insane. In fact, this camera, most of the time, it sees better in the dark than my eyes actually do. In fact, often a scene will look completely dark to me, but the iPhone 12 Pro will still be able to pick up a lot of light, a lot of colors, and a lot of detail. The starting storage has also changed, so the XS started at 64GB, whereas the iPhone 12 Pro starts at 128. All the other storage options, however, are exactly the same, so 256 and 512. Both of these iPhones still use Lightning to charge. Neither of them have a headphone jack, which has been the case for a while with iPhones, and really with most smartphones, I have to say, nowadays. They also both support wireless charging at 7.5 watts. However, the iPhone 12 Pro supports Apple's new MagSafe charger, which is a magnetic wireless charger that can charge up to 15 watts. Now, the battery life is a good 40 to 50% better on the 12 Pro than it is on the iPhone XS, which is surprising because the actual battery size really is not that different. The iPhone XS has a 2658 mAh battery, whereas the iPhone 12 Pro has a 2815 mAh battery. I would guess that the difference in battery life is mostly due to the much improved efficiency of the A14. And to be honest, it could be skewed a little bit by the fact that my iPhone XS's battery is currently at 85% battery health, whereas the iPhone 12 Pro, obviously being new, is on 100%. The 12 Pro will get me through the day easily and still have about 20% battery left around bedtime, whereas the iPhone XS will usually die in the late evening with light use, and with more intensive use it can easily die around 5 or 6 p.m. I think it's worth mentioning the packagings that these phones come into as well as their contents. So this is the iPhone XS's box, this is the iPhone 12 Pro's box. As you can see, if I turn them on the side, there is a massive difference in thickness between these two, and that is because the iPhone 12 Pro no longer includes a charger in the box, nor does it include Lightning Apple AirPods, so you don't have headphones either. And one final difference is that the iPhone 12 Pro gives you a Lightning to USB Type-C cable, whereas the iPhone XS gives you a Lightning to USB Type-A cable to charge. Finally, the iPhone 12 Pro has 5G, which the iPhone XS does not. However, I do have the UK model right here, which doesn't have the millimeter wave antenna, unlike the US models. So what's the difference? Let me explain. Millimeter wave 5G provides super low latency as well as gigabit plus speeds, which is absolutely insane, and that's the real innovative part of 5G in my opinion. More so with the latency than the speeds, but obviously gigabit speeds are still really impressive. Then we've got sub 6 GHz 5G, or sub 6 for short, which really is just boosted 4G in terms of speed. Yes, it's faster than 4G, but it's nowhere near the speeds and latency that millimeter wave 5G can achieve. The only iPhone 12s that support millimeter wave 5G are the United States models. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to test 5G yet, since I don't have it in my area, but I'm definitely going to try to test it by the time I have a full review, so I do have some numbers for you. So that's it for me. It's two very similar yet very different phones. I hope this was useful. If you have any further questions, do leave them down in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like and subscribe for more content like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.